Yes, I'm here. Sorry.
Introduce yourself.
You want me to go next? All right.
Yeah.
My name is Rafa. I'm with near Boricua Resistance. And pronouns are he, him, they, them. And yeah, you can find us in New York. Should I go into the first slide, Joe?
Sure. Let's also, okay, yeah.
Okay.
We already had Northwest go, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, so what is Boricua Resistance? I'm sure a lot of people have seen this flyer, and we're glad that you all are tuned in today and joining us. That's super important. And so we just wanted to share a little bit about who we are before we get into the meat of the presentation, which will be around what PROMESA is. So Boricua Resistance National Alliance is an alliance of different chapters throughout the United States that aim to educate, organize, and mobilize the Puerto Rican diaspora and our allies for a liberated and free Puerto Rico. We do this around 4 different main principles, the first one being decolonization. So we believe that Puerto Rico not only can govern itself and that the people have demonstrated that they can have autonomy, but that they should. And that goes into a second one, which is liberation as a human right. So we believe that all people have the right to be liberated and to live free lives, and that they have the right to fight for that by whatever means they deem necessary. Our third principle is also international solidarity. So we strongly believe not only in being solidarity with our family back home in Puerto Rico, but also in being in solidarity with other struggles, liberation struggles taking place. Actually, one of the struggles that has been very close to us and that really helped us to develop as an alliance has been the National Democratic Filipino struggle, particularly by an alliance. So shout out to them, y'all, really quick. I know some of you are on the call. And our fourth one is diaspora is integral to the struggle for liberation. You know, when we look at just the pure numbers, which Miguel will break down later, there are more of us living here in the United States than living in Puerto Rico, and that's because of the massive displacement, because of policies and because of colonialism. And so we believe that we are very much a part of the fight that is being waged already and has been being waged already by the people in Puerto Rico on the ground, and we want to join and support that. So we have chapters in New York City, Chicago, the Northwest, specifically Portland and Eugene, Oregon, as well as Seattle, Washington. That's one chapter just with different pockets, and Central Florida. So if you're located in a town or a city without a Boricua Resistance chapter, but you know of other Boricuas or allies who would like to start one, just send us an email. The email address is right there, boricuaresistancenational@gmail.com, and we can discuss the process with you. But that's just a little bit about who we are, and I'm going to pass it off to my compa.
All right. So let's get started. Today we're going to talk about Puerto Rico and the PROMESA law. The title of the presentation is Broken PROMESAs. It's part of our Boricua Resistance online school. This presentation itself, we were able to pull it off for today because it's something that we had been doing for a while already in Chicago. We had the Se Acabaron las Promesas lecture series, musical tour. It was a combination, it was a combined effort with us giving a presentation about the current humanitarian crisis in Puerto Rico, and also member and local artist Lester Ray presenting his amazing music throughout different college campuses in the Midwest. So I'm very excited to try this out with y'all, and I'm really happy y'all are here, and I really appreciate your patience with any hiccups. I'm more accustomed to giving presentations in person, not necessarily online, so I'm still learning the whole thing. One thing that I want to say also before I start is I will be talking about a bunch of topics in a very superficial way. I'm trying to condense a very long and complex history that literally dates back to Spanish colonialism. So if there are any mistakes that I make or anything, like that. I really appreciate feedback, right? I am a constant learner. And if you have any feedback, please write it so we can keep it for later and we can improve this presentation in the future. Awesome. Let's get started, y'all. All right.
This is my Puerto Rico. Come discover and experience the sounds of 500 years of history. Enjoy the sounds of our beautiful beaches and incredible natural wonders. Come, feel the unique sounds of our people. Only Puerto Rico sounds like this. Only Puerto Rico puts it all within your reach.
All right, folks, welcome to Puerto Rico. So let's talk a little bit about Puerto Rico. What do we know about it so far, right? What do we associate with it, and what is its importance, right? When we look at videos like this, right, we get an image of Puerto Rico as a paradise, as a beautiful place to vacation, right? So at this moment, I'd like you all to write it in the chat your answer to these questions, right? And what you think this video of Ricky Martin. This was in the 1990s, so this was not the same Ricky Martin that we saw out on the street waving the LGBTQ flag in the mass protests against Ricardo Rosselló, right? This was a very, very different Ricky Martin from today's Ricky Martin. So, you know, what is he selling? What is he telling us this island is? We're gonna go over some statistics, pre-Maria estimates on Puerto Rico. The population of Puerto Rico is roughly between 3 million and 3.4 million people. In the diaspora right now, there are more Puerto Ricans than in the archipelago of Puerto Rico. So we're talking roughly about 5 million to 6 million Puerto Ricans living outside of Puerto Rico. Because of our relationship with the United States, which we will go into further detail later on, the United States is the country that has the largest number of Puerto Ricans outside of Puerto Rico, but there are Puerto Ricans all around the world. And if you want to kind of take a guess as to where Puerto Ricans are and why they are there, just look at where the United States has military bases and you'll get your answer. We're going to start with Spanish colonization. When the Spaniards arrived in Puerto Rico was a populated island. The Arawak Indians, known as Taino, inhabited the island and had an economic system that was based in subsistence agriculture and trade between the multiple tribes of the Antilles, right? Once the Spaniards come in, this whole dynamic changes. They bring in diseases and they also switch up the entire economy into one of colonial extraction. So they start off enslaving the native population, but in part because the native population starts dying off because of the diseases, and then catches up to the fact that the Spaniards aren't good people that were there to help them. The Spaniards decide to go into a different labor force, and they start bringing in forced labor from Africa. So the slave trade becomes extremely important to the archipelago's economy and the entire economy of the Americas. This economic period of Spanish imperialism spans for about 300 years. So we're talking about a mass accumulation of wealth by the Spanish Empire. That's why you have and by Europe in general. That's why you have these gigantic cathedrals full of gold that are gorgeous, right? All of that gold, a big part of that gold, and a lot of the materials, especially the most fine materials, were extracted from the colonies that were in the Americas and in Africa. So if you want to look at European wealth, you can't explain it without the extraction and exploitation of European colonies, which is what most scholars now call the global South, right? It includes the Americas, but it also includes Africa and parts of Asia and things like that. So when we start getting to the end of the 19th century, right, we start going into the end of the Spanish Empire. Right? We have a series of revolutions that lead to the independence of multiple Spanish colonies throughout the Americas and just throughout the world. There's a general movement against empires as they were known at that time, and against the current economic model, which was heavily based on slave labor and agricultural exploitation in what could be called a feudal or semi-feudal mode of economic production. In this slide, we've listed a series of rebellions that happened from Spanish colonization up to the Grito de Lares. I thought it was important to include this because oftentimes when we talk about our current humanitarian crisis and the current issues that Puerto Rico faces and the world faces, we tend to be pretty gloom and doom, right? And tend to remove the actual role that radical and revolutionary movements play in well, essentially keeping us alive as we are today. So it's important to point out that the indigenous population had multiple uprisings up until the 1510s, 1520s, and then into the 18th century, right after the Haitian Revolution, you had this upswing of slave rebellions and slave revolutions. If you look at this list of revolts, they're happening almost one right after the other. And one of the ones that I want to highlight is the Marcos Lloro subversion. Marcos Lloro was a slave revolutionary leader that led a push for liberation in the town of Bayamon, which had several major sugarcane agricultural companies. One of them, some of you might know, is the hacienda that is owned by the family that produces Barrilito. So if you are a Barrilito fan, you have the little bit of history to add to your love for that rum. Basically, any rum, any sort of agricultural product is tied to a really messed up history. It's tied to slavery, so there's no way of escaping it. Then after this series of revolts, right, there's a period of heavy repression and a buildup of other conspiracies that combine both the enslaved people and then a new upcoming like local bourgeois, local owning class. So this dynamic between the local owning class and the colonial owning class gets to a point where they conflict, right? And that's when you started getting all of these Republican revolutions around the Americas. And in Puerto Rico and Cuba, in 1868, you got the Grito de Lares and the Grito de Yara, which were conjoined uprisings that were planned to happen with support of the Dominican Republic, which had just recently gotten its independence, with support of Venezuela. So it was an Antillean effort to liberate the Caribbean at that point. But due to a bunch of reasons that we can talk about in a separate presentation, which is currently titled Boricua Resistance from Agüey Baná to Yo No Me Dejo, we can learn more about these uprisings and these forms of resistance that exist up to this day. So if you're interested in learning more about that, let us know in the chat, and that'll help motivate us to create that presentation for the near future. So, are there any questions so far before we go into this deep mess that we're about to go into?
So if anyone has any questions, I hope everybody knows how to do the chat. And then also, if you're on your phone and you can't chat, if you need to do the call feature, you can do that at this time as well. So we're just taking a pause, and if anyone has any questions, let us know.
All right.
There's one question. If the slides can be shared post-presentation, I think we can do that, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
We can do that. And then also there is basically an entire bibliography that was used to create this. So we can send an email to the people that registered with the list of names for the articles and books that we used to make this. So if you're really interested, you can learn even more through all of these cool books. All right. While we're here, before we go into the U.S. invasion, I want to frame this. I want you to look at the rest of the presentation in this way, right? So during the 20th century, we can say that there were three key economic periods in Puerto Rico. The first economic period is called the period of industrialized agriculture. I will talk further in detail about this. The second period is the period of light manufacturing, or Operation Bootstrap, Operación Manos a la Obra. And then the third period is the capital-intensive manufacturing, or the age of the 936. So I will focus on those three periods for the 20th century. They all kind of end around 1995. And then when we go into 1995, I will start talking about the age of privatization and the neoliberal wave that leads us to today's disaster capitalism. So we can all look forward to that. Alexandria, are there any questions that I should answer now, or should we?
Yeah, we have a question. So, is there more information about the indigenous peoples of Puerto Rico prior Spanish colonization? So, I know a couple books about the Caribbean in general. That's the indigenous people of the Caribbean, but I'm sure Miguel has more information.
There are several books. The thing with the period of pre-European invasion is that there really aren't that many written records, and when you're looking at the written records of that time, right, you're looking at records that were written by the European people themselves. So it's a little complicated to get like a really good idea of what life was like before Europeans invaded, but we will make sure to include all the resources that we have that we base this information on in the bibliography that we'll email out. Cool? All right, vamos a seguimos. All right, so on July 25th, 1898, the United States invaded Puerto Rico as part of the Spanish-Cuban-Filipino-American War. Most of you who know this war will normally know it as the Spanish-American War, but several scholars have read about this war, particularly from the perspective of the colonies. Believe that calling it the Spanish-American War kind of erases the very real role that the revolutionary movements in all of these countries played in the outcome of this war. So if you go to Cuba and you talk about this particular time period in their history, they actually call it the Cuban-American War. And similarly, so it's the Spanish, Cuban, and Filipino-American War. This war basically made the United States a global empire. With the Treaty of Paris, towards the end of the war, Spain ceded their last remaining colonies outside of Africa, which included Puerto Rico, Cuba, Guam, and the Philippines. And then shortly after this, we start seeing the first wave of Puerto Rican migration to places controlled by the United States, like Hawaii. So, fun fact: there is a population of Puerto Ricans in Hawaii that still maintain a lot of the traditions from Puerto Rico, like singing aguinaldos and things like that. But they are like the los bisnietos. Oh my gosh, what's the word? They're the the children of the children, the great grandchildren of these first wave of migrants over there. And although they might not know Spanish, they sing these aguinaldos, and it's like you're in I don't know, Utuado, hearing somebody sing. So I wanted to show you this slide here because one of the things that's important to take into account when we're looking at the Puerto Rican humanitarian crisis is how imperial powers, right, colonizers justify colonization. So you have two cartoons from the early 1900s that depict the United States and Britain, in the case of the one on the left, as in their role, right, in their role as you could say the guides for the rest of the world towards civilization. If you look at the cartoon on the left, the cartoon is titled "The White Man's Burden." So it shows Uncle Sam and a British guy carrying on their backs all of their colonies, and going through all these boulders towards the peak of civilization. Right. Similarly, on the right, you have Uncle Sam confronting its newly acquired countries and basically laying out what's the plan for each one. So, with Cuba, they were guiding them towards independence. With Puerto Rico, it was more about annexation and becoming Americans. And then the Philippines, they were like, oh, what do we do with this? So think about the racial expressions that are made in these cartoons, and think about how the colonizers are being portrayed versus how the colonies are being shown. And let me know what you think. What do you think is going on? How are these countries, right, justifying their control of huge portions of the world? All right. Onward. We're going into the period of industrialized agriculture, and then
if we could just take a pause because there was some folks in the chat who responded to your question.
Let's do it. I want to hear it.
Cartoons. So there was somebody who said, funny how they are stepping on oppression, right? Which I think is the white man's burden cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of people said it's so condescending. And how are these countries justifying their control of huge portions of the world?
No, I just wrote the question in case people needed a reference.
And then somebody else says superstition, like with the Filipinos, Christianize the Filipinos. That one president, I think it's McKinley, right? That made that comment.
Yeah.
Uncle Sam has a red cross to save them. So yeah, those were some folks' thoughts regarding the cartoon.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your comments. All right. So let's move on. We're going into the industrialization of agriculture. In 1900, the United States passes the Foraker Act, which establishes a civilian government that has an appointed governor, an executive council, and a House of Representatives with 35 elected members. It also includes a judicial system with a Supreme Court and a non-voting resident commissioner. So I wanted to point out this fact about the Foraker Act, because a lot of times when people talk about what we're going to talk about later on, the Commonwealth and the Estado Libre Asociado, they often mention it as if there was no elected local government before, or any sort of like internal national structure, that it was almost a direct control over the island. And this isn't entirely true. The House of Representatives actually played a big role in the internal politics of Puerto Rico, and played a big role in dealing with a lot of labor disputes, which were really one of the main movements around this time period, which goes from the 1900 to 1930s. And there's a resource on that. There's a scholar named Jorel Badillo, who's written extensively about this time period, and I will make sure to include their articles for y'all to read later, because there's a lot of really interesting stuff that happened during this time period, and it's often not really talked about much. So when the United States takes over Puerto Rico had a somewhat monocrop economy, right? It was an extraction economy, but it wasn't necessarily like a high wealth creating extraction economy. So what they do is they start industrializing. And during the first couple decades, the majority of the Puerto Rican economy focuses on sugarcane. And by 1935, right, about 60% of Puerto Rico's total exports come from the sugar economy. And then the land becomes heavily concentrated in the hands of U.S. corporations. So I believe at one point, 4 corporations owned almost like 70% of Puerto Rican land. And if anybody wants to correct me on that, please let me know, because I know that's not 100%. That's not 100% accurate. I'm looking forward to any other expert on that to hear from them soon. Then around the late 1920s, a couple things happened, right? And there's some major changes. You have a Great Depression, World Wars, and in Puerto Rico, you have 2 major hurricanes. So 1928, there is, oh my gosh, what is the hurricane? San Ciriaco? Oh my gosh. There's 2 major hurricanes that happen, and hopefully somebody's writing their names out.
And it's not San Felipe?
San Felipe was 1928, and 1932 was, anyway, these were hurricanes that were recorded to have somewhere between 120 mile an hour winds. So they were Category 5 hurricanes. Keep in mind that the actual strength of the hurricane can't really be deciphered well, because the technology that existed at that time to measure wind speed wasn't as advanced as it is today. And as we know, even in Hurricane Maria, at one point, the devices that were measuring wind speeds were knocked over. So the important thing to note is that these 2 hurricanes followed one another really quickly, and they absolutely devastated the island. Hundreds of people lost their lives, and thousands of people were left without jobs and without homes. And on top of this, in 1929, you get the economic depression. Then we start in 1934 with the sugarcane workers strike, and this entire environment, right, creates a lot of discontent with the government. So in the lack of a strong presence from socialist or communist groups, the Nationalist Party starts organizing within the organized sugar workers and begins to grow. And several things happen in between the period of the 1930s and 1950s. Again, the presentation on Puerto Rican resistance will cover more of that. But the other important thing to keep in mind around this time is that in 1941, the United States enters World War II. And with entering World War II, you start seeing the recovery from the economic depression as the economy focuses on war production. And eventually, when the war is won, it leads to an economic boom that in Puerto Rico wasn't really experienced in the same way as it was in the United States. This is why we had in the 1950s the uprising in Jayuya and the assassination attempts on President Truman and Congress by the Nationalist Party. They were trying to get Puerto Rico to be independent and have an economic recovery on their own terms. Oh, I wanted to show you this video.
Just months into World War II, the United States would grant Puerto Rico the same strategic importance that the Spanish Empire had given it in the past. It had become the most important part of American defense system. Air bases, naval and ground systems, communications, roads, and all kinds of military installations would transform Puerto Rico into one of the most important strategic points in the Atlantic for the successful defense of commercial maritime routes, the Allied supply lines, recruitments, Caribbean oil transit, and the Panama Canal itself.
So do we have any questions or comments up to this point? I know I just threw a lot of information at y'all. Let me know.
The video is a little choppy, but it's fine. And then we have a couple of things in the chat. So.
All right,
Yeah,
we can.
so listen, they couldn't really hear the video, so could we get a little like an overview on basically what we saw? Is like the militarization.
Yes. So the video basically just shows how during World War II the United States repositioned Puerto Rico as a military strategic and important a spot in the U.S.'s control of the Western Hemisphere. So Puerto Rico was one of the points of the Panama Canal Triangle, which included, I believe, Washington, D.C., San Juan, and Panama. And between those 3 points, the United States had basically their defense system. The key thing that they were trying to defend from Puerto Rico was, of course, the Panama Canal, which was a crucial military and economic choke point in the Americas. So that's more or less what it talks about. So what you see there in the 1940s is Puerto Rico becomes militarily important for the United States. That's when they started occupying the islands of Culebra and Vieques to practice war games. And that's also when the United States starts turning Puerto Rico kind of into a showcase for their ideological and economic system, which I will talk about very soon, right? During this time, we have the upswing of the Popular Democratic Party, Partido Popular Democrático, which was led at that time by Luis Muñoz Marin, and whose slogan was bread, land, and liberty. Almost an exact copy of the Soviet slogan of peace, land, and bread. Right? So the Populist Party was really making a claim, like many populist parties do, to be there to serve the working people. And their argument was a quote-unquote depoliticized approach to the development of the island. They were saying that nationalists and people who were pro-independence were extremists and unrealistic, and that a model of economic development maintaining a friendly relationship with the United States was the best way moving forward. That's when you get the creation of the Estado Libre Asociado, the freely associated state, or what is known in the United States as the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, which is often viewed as a compromise between independence and statehood. Keep in mind also that globally, this isn't happening in a vacuum, right? After World War II, you have the creation of the United Nations, and also I'm forgetting the actual name of it, but basically the United Nations says, colonies are no longer cool, guys. Get your game together. And all of these imperial powers like the United States and Britain all of a sudden have to say, oh, well, you know, we don't really have colonies. We're helping them get independence, blah, blah, blah. And that's where you get the creation of the Commonwealths. So you have the Commonwealth of Canada, the Commonwealth of Australia, and the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. But if you look at the case of Puerto Rico has a very different type of economic relationship with the United States than Canada does with Great Britain, right? For Canada, Great Britain is basically a tax expense in essence, right? There are other things within the law that I believe give Great Britain certain amounts of power over Canada that, let's say, the United States wouldn't have. But for all intents and purposes, Canada is its own country and can decide its own future. In Puerto Rico, what we got was a creation of a local government. So now the governor, instead of being appointed, is elected by popular vote. There was a creation of a constitution, which is based off of and completely dependent on the US Constitution. Fun fact, when the Puerto Rican Constitution was being drafted, there were a couple of provisions there that the U.S. Congress said, we can't do that. One of them was a right to work, to have a job, and a right to have a house. Right? Those two provisions were a little bit too radical for the U.S. Congress, so those didn't make the draft. And the Puerto Rican Constitution obviously then does not guarantee those things anymore. But at the time that it was written, it was viewed as one of the most progressive documents, like nation-building documents in the hemisphere. Funny, right? Around this time, you also have the creation of Operation Bootstrap. With Operation Bootstrap, the government attempted a rapid industrialization of the island of Puerto Rico. This was a mix of Keynesian economics with a massive population transfer to the United States. During this time, Puerto Rico created over 44 public corporations. So by 1994, there were 44 public corporations. 10 of them were for-profit corporations that were meant to help, the government stay afloat. Also, during this time, any debt that was acquired by law could only be acquired towards capital development. So that means to create new infrastructure, to build bridges, to build up these public corporations, right? It was an economic model that actually worked for a little bit of time, but then there was one main fault in that model, and the main fault was that it relied on tax exceptions. So a lot of the industries that were attracted to Puerto Rico during this time period were there essentially tax-free, with an infrastructure that was provided for them. So it was great for them. And then at that point, Puerto Rico actually became one of the main manufacturing places in the Caribbean. Most like home products that people had in the United States at that time, a good number of them were actually made in Puerto Rico. And then the third or the fourth reason why the United States invested so heavily in Operation Bootstrap and this model of economic development is also because they wanted to use Puerto Rico as a showcase of capitalism. Take into account that in 1959, Cuba had a socialist revolution, and they were building a government based on prioritizing people with the support of the Soviet Union. Take into account that also the Cold War was happening at this time. And while oftentimes what we hear about the Cold War is the almost catastrophic confrontations that happened between the United States and the Soviet Union, for example, with the missile crisis, mutually assured destruction, things like that, there was also an ideological war and an economic war. So Cuba and Puerto Rico played key roles in that economic and ideological war in the Americas. Cuba, on one side, demonstrated socialism as a model of development, and Puerto Rico, on the other side, demonstrating capitalism as a model of development. So the United States was very much invested in having Puerto Rico do really well at this time.
We have okay, so yeah, we're gonna be taking questions. We have one right now. Same with Law 20 and 22 with 100% exemption. So is it the same with Law 20 and 22 with the 100% exemption?
It's similar. In this section that we're about to go into, we're gonna see a lot of the scrambling on behalf of the government and trying to go back to things that worked before. So a lot of times it'll seem like history is repeating itself, but it's only repeating itself on a worse foot.
And then we have some good points. The 936 insured benefits for corporations, and then were marketed as a democracy in the Caribbean. Can you guys see they're just making some good statements here. So
yeah, so one of the things too that we should keep in mind is that Operation Bootstraps also industrialized Puerto Rico at such a rapid rate that the amount of agriculture workers were then left out of work because they couldn't find, there was such a mass of agriculture workers that they could not keep up with the demand for jobs. So unemployment actually at this time soared in Puerto Rico. And so what was the response? And this is why it's really important, because to understand why we're here, we have to understand what was happening at that time. The federal government literally threw money at billboards to say, you know, cheap boats to New York, find a job in New York. We will promise you a job in New York. And they would assign people living in different places. So like the Lower East Side, if they were going to do textiles, it would be Bushwick if they were going to do cigar factories. And this happened with different cities and urban centers around the world where our labor was exported out because they couldn't keep up with the demand for jobs in Puerto Rico as a result of this Operation Bootstraps.
Right, and that's the time period where you see the creation of the Puerto Rican diasporas that we mostly associate with historically, right? So you have the creation of Chicago, you have the creation of Holyoke, Massachusetts, New York, as these Rust Belt Puerto Rican centers. Also in Ohio, what's Lorain, Ohio? Anyway. So yeah, the Puerto Ricans went to all these industrial centers, and they were attractive labor because they were very cheap, and they were U.S. citizens. So you, as an employer, you didn't have as much of a mess to deal with in order to get cheap labor. The other positive side effect that they saw in this was that after a time period, this agricultural population that became industrialized in the United States would also be able to return to Puerto Rico and be able to participate in the skilled labor force in the island. So yes, that's when we have the creation of the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s Puerto Rican diaspora. Are there any other questions or comments?
And then we have a good point of them framing it as an overpopulation problem, and but you know, the whole eugenics frame of mind.
Yep. Around that time, you have the creation of La Operación, which was a mass sterilization project in Puerto Rico and in the diaspora that eventually led to the creation of the birth control pill, but was also done without the consent of any of the participants. So Puerto Rico has a contribution to the world in terms of IRBs, and if you've ever worked in a university setting, the Institutional Review Board, right? You're supposed to go through that to demonstrate that you're not committing human rights abuses, and Puerto Rico is one of the examples that they give, alongside with the Nazi experiments. So, fun fact. Mm-hmm. Anything else? All right, so let's keep going. Let's dive into this. We're gonna go into the debt crisis. So we start seeing signs of a crisis in the 1970s. In 1972 is the year when the Puerto Rican public corporations that were created during Operation Bootstrap started showing for the first time economic losses. Then in 1973, you get the U.S. Economic recession, which lasts between 1973 and 1975. Right, this economic recession is often tied to the oil global market. And just as an interesting note or something to keep in mind for later on, we should note that the crisis in Puerto Rico happened about a year before the crisis in the United States. So in a lot of ways, economically, Puerto Rico has kind of become like a canary in the mine for U.S. economic development. After the economic recession, you have a scrambling from the local government and the federal government to figure out how to get things back into growth, and you have the development of the Plan de Desarrollo Íntegro and the Plan 2020, which were both attempting to mix as many industries as possible to like make it, you know, try to get Puerto Rico to not be so vulnerable to the fluctuations of the global market. At this time, we start seeing the influx of military development, petrochemical, pharmaceutical industries, as well as an attempt to go into mining. In the central mountain region of Puerto Rico, between Adjuntas and Utuado, there were huge deposits of gold, copper, and nickel that were explored in the 1940s, 1950s. And around this time, there were about 2 U.S. corporations that were moving really heavily into extracting these resources. If you've ever been to Puerto Rico, you'll notice that there is a highway, Highway 10, that goes from Ponce and abruptly ends in Adjuntas. And there's also a Highway 10 that goes from Arecibo and abruptly ends in Utuado. That highway was actually originally constructed to carry all of the extracted minerals from this region. But a lot of things happened in the decades of the 1970s, 80s, and finishing in 1993 that actually stopped these. And this was a rising in Puerto Rican environmental movement, which was very much tied with this movement. Sorry, can other people mute their? I think it's Lorraine. Sorry to call you out.
That's okay. I don't know this system. That's why.
Okay.
Sorry. This is the first time I went on a.
That's okay. Were you able to find the mute? You're good.
Okay, cool. So yeah, if you want to learn more about this time period, particularly the anti-mining movement, shameless plug, I wrote an article about how the Puerto Rican nationalist movement spilled over into the Puerto Rican environmental movement. So very different from the United States. The environmental movement in Puerto Rico has more or less always had a very political angle to it, because it's basically an offspring of the independence movement during a time when there was heavy repression against independentistas and people, calling for a different mode of Puerto Ricans living and being able to lead their own lives. So this graphic shows the accumulation of debt by the government versus the Producto Nacional Bruto. How do you say that? The
National net.
The GNP, General National Product, something like that.
Gross
national product.
There you go, gross national product. And as you can see, right, the blue line is the accumulated debt. The orange bars are the gross national product. You can see the blue line catching up to the gross national product, and right now where we are, it is way above the gross national product. So there's a couple of key moments here, right? You have the 1970s, where you had the scare of the recession. Those two lines, those two things came really close together. And then the government took a set of actions, the 936, which I'm gonna talk about right after this. And it led to a time period of economic development. So the gross national product kept growing. In 1995, you have the ending of the 936, and then you start seeing an upswing in the accumulated debt. Also keep in mind that up until the 2000s, by law, the Puerto Rican government cannot acquire debt to pay for anything else but infrastructure. In the 2000s, these laws are changed, and then the Puerto Rican government actually starts acquiring debt to pay debt, and we're getting very close to the present time. So in response to the 1973 to 1975 economic crisis, the Puerto Rican and US governments try to bring investments to the island by IRS Section 936. So 936 allowed the remittance of tax-free profits to the US, incentivizing foreign investment on the island and generating huge profits for corporations benefiting from the code. This meant almost complete tax exemption for anybody that settled their business for 30 years. So, during this time, the Puerto Rican economy then shifts from manufacturing to capital-intensive manufacturing. So this is when you start seeing the upswing of pharmaceuticals, right? At one point in the late 1990s, if anybody ever consumed Viagra, that Viagra was made in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico was the main producer of it. And several of these giant pharmaceutical companies remained on the island up until the tax exemptions were completely out, which was in 2005. And 2005 will be a date to keep in mind for what's going to happen very soon. When in 1995, the 936 tax exemption is phased out. The Puerto Rican government pushes for an extensive neoliberal agenda. So with neoliberalism, you have the privatization of essentially everything in life. The idea is that government is inefficient, and the most efficient way of governing is by reducing government intervention. But in order to do this, you need heavy government intervention. So it's a very, very contradictory economic and social model of development. I'm sure most people here have heard the word neoliberalism said at least once, because it is the ruling social economic project that we currently live under. And it looks to privatize everything. So that's why in 1995, under the governorship of Pedro Rosselló, the government started selling off the public corporations. So in 95, we had the sale of the Puerto Rican Maritime Shipping Company, several state-owned farms, hotels, and mills. We also have the sale of the water company, which is the Autoridad de Acueductos y Alcantarillados. And then you go into 1998 with the sale of the Puerto Rico Telephone Company. This was kind of a tipping point in Puerto Rican history. In 1998, there was the people's strike, right? It was the strike to stop the privatization of the telephone company, which became bloody at one point, as the image on the right shows, and led to a general work stoppage where over 500,000 people participated. At this point, this had been the largest mass mobilization in the history of Puerto Rico. Since then, we've had a bunch of other mass mobilizations, and you know, you could say that the present day history of social movements in Puerto Rico really sees a pivoting point around this time. This was a moment that really marked the lives of a lot of people that are still around today, and that are very much involved in social movements on the island. So in 2002, the original contract for the water company expires, and the government sells it to Ondeo. And then this is a huge mess. Ondeo realizes that the infrastructure is really old. The previous privatizers didn't invest anything. They were basically just collecting checks. Also keep in mind that all of the majority of the industries that were being sold at that time were said to actually be operating at a profit. In spite of the government saying that these were actually failing companies, that these were you know, losing a lot of money and were being inefficient. So a lot of the early privatizers were just cashing in, right? They were very much low intervention, just get my paycheck type of thing, and let things run. That's where we get to the mess of the water company, and that's why 2 years after they make the sale to Ondeo, the Puerto Rican government has to buy it back. So yeah, neoliberalism doesn't really work. Are there any questions at this point? I see the chat popping.
So we have a good point that also Hurricane George was in 1998 as well. And then also back on the graph, we have a question if it's still like this since it ends in 2014.
Back on the graph, what?
Is it still like this since it ends in 2014?
No, the accumulated debt considerably surpasses the gross national product. I don't have the exact numbers of it, but I know, you know, the GNP is nowhere near the blue line. So the blue line is, you know, somewhere up in white space, and the yellow line is down.
I have another good point. La telephone. It's important to the resistance and also the model for privatization of services, and it's the beginning of draining the public coffers and the lobbyists starting to cash in.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Awesome.
Good point. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you all. So then we enter the age of crises. I forgot to mention, after 1995, I have listed here three more economic periods. So from 95 to more or less 2016, you can debate me on this, is what would be called the age of privatization. So this is the neoliberal wave in Puerto Rico, where the government is just saying, sell, sell, sell. Let's get some quick cash in, and let's get rid of these public corporations. Then around 2005, when you start seeing, right here, the end of the repeal of 1936, you start seeing these job losses. A lot of people, the pharmaceuticals leave, so a lot of those high-paying jobs, high education jobs are gone. You start seeing this mass exodus of people starting, and then we start going into what I'll call the age of denial. This is when the government is saying, no, everything is all right. We're still doing fine. The 936 repeal wasn't as big of a deal. We'll manage to get growth somehow. And between 2005 and 2015, there is a set of policies that are put into place more as a reaction to the crises. So there is the creation of tax havens between 2008 and 2012. The sale of Highway 5 and Highway 22, the sale of the international airport, all kind of as last-ditch efforts to pay off debt. Right at this point, the Puerto Rican government is accumulating more debt than it is able to pay, and is trying to pay off the debt with acquiring more debt. And this gets it to a tipping point in 2015, where we get this message from this guy here.
Justamente a través de un mensaje a la Nación, el gobernador de Puerto Rico, Alejandro García, ha reconocido que no cuenta con los recursos para cancelar la deuda pública del país, que ronda en $70,000 millones.
La deuda pública, considerando el nivel de actividad económica actual, es impagable.
So the debt is unpayable. The governor comes out clean about that, and then tries to advocate for federal intervention. Right before he makes this declaration, the governor before him tries to create these set of tax exemptions which still influence Puerto Rico today. So a big one that was already mentioned in the chat is Act 20 and Act 22. The Act 20 is the Export Services Act, which is meant to provide services from Puerto Rico to outside markets, including research, and for anybody that establishes a company in the island, they get more than 90% tax exemption. The second side of this, right, it was the first side was to get them to move their business to the island. The second side of that was to get them to move to the island with Act 22. So this is an Individual Investors Act. It requires investors to live on the island for about half of the year, so that's 183 days, and it provides them with triple tax exemption. So you get exempted on taxes from the local government, the federal government, and what's the third one? Whatever other tax there is. I can't remember right now. I think you're on mute, Alexandria. Okay. And then right before these, you have the Act 73, which is the Economic Incentives for the Development of Puerto Rico Act. which was meant to attract big corporations in housing, agricultural, and energetic manufacturing. Again, 90 to 100% tax exemption. Again, this whole idea that if we just give them more tax exemptions, they'll be able to lift up the economy by getting us good paying jobs while the government pays for everything else. But at this point, the government has no other access to capital, and it can't produce more debt, so it can't invest in infrastructure. So any model that talks about complete tax exemption is basically just gifting land and gifting resources from Puerto Rico and giving back to the Puerto Rican economy actually very little. In terms of sustainability. So after the governor declares the debt unpayable, we get into this whole mess with Lin-Manuel Miranda. I'm sure you all saw his special on Last Week Tonight, where they talk about the humanitarian crisis in Puerto Rico, and I'll be honest, at that point when that special came out, everybody on the island was pretty excited about Manuel Miranda. They said, oh look, he's talking about us, he's bringing attention to the situation, but then quickly he kind of turns over and is fully backing the creation of the mess that I will talk about in a minute, which is called PROMESA. Manuel Miranda becomes a huge backer of it, and interestingly enough, his father has some stake in the creation of the Fiscal Control Board. So just a fun fact. So yeah, don't trust Manuel Miranda. He said it was a mistake to support PROMESA, but so let's talk about the Puerto Rican debt, right? What is it? Why is Puerto Rico in such a big debt? It's around $74 billion. There are economists that say that it's considerably more than that, and then there are people that say that it's actually less. But in all honesty, we have no idea how much it actually is, because both the local and federal government are against an audit of the Puerto Rican debt. There have been multiple citizen advocacy movements to get the Puerto Rican debt audited, for people just to know, where is this debt from? Why do we owe this much money? There is some information that was attained through independent journalism, such as that was made by hedge clippers, where they found that around $33.5 billion of the debt is interest. This is interest that is similar to a payday loan. These are almost these are high interest loans that have an interest rate of about 800%. So what this means is $37.8 billion of this is outstanding capital appreciation bonds. So the principal, or we could say like the minimal debt that was acquired, the original debt that was acquired was around 4.3 billion, right? At a rate of 785%. Then you start getting the accrual of these $33.5 billion extra. So we're talking that more than half of the debt is actually interest. So it's not money that the government actually took out. It's basically loan sharks that loaned you $5 and now you owe them 600. So that's one thing we know about it. The reality is we won't fully know until it is audited, and I feel it's pretty safe for us to say that, for me to say that us as a group believe the debt itself is illegitimate, in big part because the Puerto Rican government is a colony of the United States, and by being a colony of the United States, it really has no autonomy to acquire debt in a legal sense. But that's, you know, that's our opinion. At the minimum, right, one of the campaigns that we are supporting is the Auditoría Ya effort to get an audit of the debt to move forward, so people actually know, you know what's going on. Part of the reason that a lot of people believe the government doesn't want to audit the debt is because people will realize that all the administrations had a stake in acquiring this debt, and they basically, you know, signed on to a really bad deal. So it's like that person that decided to release funds to this African king that was promising them $1 million in inheritance. Right? It's kind of a similar situation. The Puerto Rican government got fished in a colossal way. Do we have any questions about this?
The chat is lit. We have one that says, Lin Manuel, he is promoting PROMESA because his father is a lobbyist for hedge funds that benefits the PROMESA hedge funds, yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Cancel the debt.
Right on. All right. Let's move on. So we have, at this point, the deepening crisis. This graphic on the right shows Puerto Rican economic population exodus. And as you can see here, before the economic crisis of 2006, the population of Puerto Ricans in the United States and Puerto Ricans in the archipelago were more or less on par, right? When you get the mass closing of the pharmaceuticals, you have several thousand high-paid, highly educated workers that, you know, move to the United States to work in other similar industries over there. And then little by little, you have these repercussions. So more and more people start moving out. I myself moved out in 2007, right around here, right? I wasn't an economic migrant. I moved for college, but in these statistics, people like me would also figure. And then you get to 2017. And really in 2017, we have Hurricane Maria and Hurricane Irma, which leads to, at least at that point, a temporary skyrocketing of migration to the United States. What we later learned is that in the following months, like 3 or 4 months after the hurricane, some of the people that originally left the island started coming back, but we still have a larger proportion of people that migrated to the U.S. because of Hurricane Maria than before. Right? Before Hurricane Maria, we were talking about 250,000 people each year, I believe. No, am I wrong? No, 80,000 people each year. So it was 80,000 people each year, which ended up being about 2 planefuls of people leaving the island every day. When Maria hits, the whole thing changes. So once the U.S. Census goes through and we get through this entire mess, hopefully we'll get a better idea of what the new migration looks like. And the most likely scenario is Puerto Rico has most likely considerably less population than it did in 2016 or even 2010, and we're probably going to be looking at more than 6 million people in the United States, fully, you know, or as fully as you can migrate to the United States as a Puerto Rican, right? The Puerto Rican migration story is always one of back and forth. There's the term of the La Guagua Aérea, you know, the Airbus, when you know, people come back and forth all the time, and this is increasingly more of a reality for the Caribbean, right? As Caribbean islands are having to deal with the effects of climate change mixed in with the consequences of 500 years of colonialism, and mixed in with economic models of exploitation, which aren't meant to create sustainable infrastructure, sustainable economies. So, aquí donde estamos. So what is PROMESA? Yes.
We have a couple things. We
Yes.
have a question. How is the debt currently being paid off? And then through deep austerity measures, then the answer, through deep austerity measures, including cuts to healthcare, cutting the minimum wage, pensions, and so much more that I'm sure that we know about, through school closures. And then someone posted an article about, let me see. So yeah, we're talking about still the, how's the debt being paid off currently? Is the question.
Well, the debt right now is there's a couple things that are happening to the debt. So in 2016, we got the imposition of the Fiscal Control Board through the Puerto Rico Oversight, Management, and Economic Stability Act, which is known as PROMESA. This is what I'll be talking about next. And this control board is supposed to figure out how Puerto Rico will pay the debt. A couple of things have been happening since then. There have been some temporary moratoriums. There have been some reductions on the debt, but mostly what's been happening is gigantic austerity measures. So the control board is basically setting out to cut up Puerto Rico and sell it to the highest bidder in a similar fashion to what previous administrations that got us to this mess did. Because the control board is literally like meeting up to today, things on how they're actually planning to pay it off are changing each day. So I won't speak with authority about what they're doing because my information could be outdated. But yeah, going back, right? PROMESA means Puerto Rico Oversight, Management, and Economic Stability Act, and it instated a fiscal control board. This fiscal control board is made up of 7 members. They are appointed by the U.S. government, kind of similar to the early 1900s. I don't know if people remember, what was going on around that time. And they have complete control over legislation in Puerto Rico. So the local government in Puerto Rico still exists. It's still making laws and whatever, but at any point, the control board can say, nah, this isn't working, cut it. And that's it. So whatever notion of actual local autonomy there existed in Puerto Rico during the fantasy days of the Commonwealth, it's completely gone. The Puerto Rican government can say tomorrow, we are going to go 100% green energy by next year, and the fiscal control board can say, no, you're not. And that's it, end of discussion. And then the PROMESA law, the funny thing about the name of it is that it means promise in Spanish. So again, there's this whole game of how we name things. When we had the creation of the Commonwealth, in Spanish, it was Estado Libre Asociado, right? Freely associated state. That in English, it's Commonwealth, right? Over here, in the English name, talks about oversight, management, and economic stability. And in Spanish, they simplified it to, it's the promise that we'll figure things out and we'll fix everything. I saw the chat light up. What's going on? Questions or comments?
We got it all. So basically, how do we combat the mass migration to the U.S.? Gentrification is pretty big in Puerto Rico, which can lead to a Hawaii-like situation. Should we have goals to eventually move to the island? And if so, how do we do so respectfully with the existing communities since we are the dysphoria?
That is a great question. I want to. Can we hold off on that question for the end? I think it deserves a little bit more discussion.
Yep, and then there's just some comments on PROMESA being bullshit, and yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, the Fiscal Control Board is composed majority by people that have deep ties with banks and hedge funds, deep ties with all of the people that have a quote-unquote stake in the Puerto Rican debt. They are basically making sure that themselves and their family and their friends get paid. And each one of the people pictured here, apart from being just like the stereotype for bad guys, like look at them. They
White.
Huh? What?
White.
Yes. White, and also just like mean looking. They like, I mean, look at Arthur Gonzalez. Like you would cross him in the street. I mean, you wouldn't think, oh, this guy's gonna be cracking jokes anytime soon. Anyway, I'm not gonna focus on people's appearances, right? That's not the issue here. The issue is that these people are the children of bankers that played a huge role in buying up this Puerto Rican debt. They are people that advocate for like religious education. They are just horrendous people in general. And on top of all of this, right, this board, which are all supposed to be volunteers, then hired a director. Her name is Natalie Yaresco, and her salary is, gonna take any guesses on the salary? Obviously, this is a fiscal control board, so they have to be they have to be very strict about how they spend, and they have to be very austere, right? We can't be spending a bunch of money just because. Does anybody know what the salary is?
So they're saying, oh man, my math, 1,000. I don't know, 500,000.
Close. $625,000 a year.
Oh yeah, they got it. They know.
Okay, cool. Yes. So, yeah, what's up with that? Jose Carrion III, the baby boy of the Banco Popular, he is the president of the board, and when confronted about Natalie Yaresco's salary, he said, well, her salary is justified based on her experiences and blah, blah, blah. She's earning more than the president of the United States and what is it, Prime Minister or Chancellor Angela Merkel. She's earning more than, I think, both of them combined. So just keep that in mind, right? This is supposed to be an austere board. But again, their role is just to make sure their friends are paid and, to get their guisos whenever they can. And then this is when they arrived. This was August 31st, 2016. They had their first PROMESA conference on the island, and they were met with giant protests. The protests actually stopped them from arriving by land. So in a very symbolic way and a completely historically unaware way, they arrived by sea. So yeah, this brought back a couple images from the past. And
Also, if you think about it, the broken promises is the same as the broken treaties, is the same as everything, the history. But we do have another point, another question. So no one on the oversight board is paid, just the director is the question.
By law, they're not supposed to be paid directly, but the board can hire people as they wish, and they can move capital to get whatever project they need to get done. So that's how they justify Natalie Yaresco's salary, because they have the power to give anybody they want any salary, as long as they can justify it under the pretense of this person will help us figure out how to bring back Puerto Rico to solvency. So
a good example, I think, too, is like if you look at Kaleher and the school closures and all of that, and the way that money was being embezzled and side funneled into projects and things like that. It really isn't just about how they can move capital and that power to be able to do that in interest of what they can make off of. So if you look at Carrion, right, Banco Popular has really been making money off the Puerto Rican people for years. And so he really can use that position that he's in to drive and funnel things to benefit them.
We have another question. Where does the fiscal board work, or where is it situated? And then I know they don't have to live or be on the island, so where would their offices be?
they have offices in New York and Puerto Rico.
And then go ahead.
Yeah, so similarly to the New York Control Board back in the 80s or 70s, by law they're allowed to get an office wherever they need to. So the New York Control Board had an office in the World Trade Center, and then the Fiscal Control Board today, I think, has an office in, well, Rafa, you probably know this better. There's like a Native American museum in New York or something.
There is. I don't know. I didn't know that's where their offices were. But in addition to their offices, they also, a lot of the people in the Fiscal Control Board have homes in New York. That's their full-time homes are in New York, many of them, as well as they sit on the boards of different institutions within New York. An example of this would be 26 Federal Plaza is the office. Thank you, Lorraine. Another example of this would be the guy, the bald guy. I think his name is what's his name? The bald guy that's on in the picture. If you go back, he actually is a professor at NYU. This guy, Arthur J. Gonzalez, is a professor at NYU. So a lot of these folks are actually really tied to different institutions in New York. And if they're not tied to institutions, they live in New York. Hedge Clippers has a really good publication where they outline where these people are, and we can also share that as part of the bibliography.
Yep, we will definitely do. And then they meet usually between New York and Puerto Rico, so they try to like divvy out the meetings. That's why, although the first conference that they had in Puerto Rico was in August 31st, they had already met before that. And this was kind of like their public relations conference. So once we get to the imposition of the control board, we start heading into today's age of disaster capitalism. I'm going to play this video. My bad. I tried to go full screen, it didn't work. There you go.
A lot of people, when they hear that I moved to Puerto Rico, ask, what's it really like? And our answer to them is that the weather's great, the climate's wonderful. I love it here, I love the people here, I love the food here, I love the culture here, the sentiment, the vibe. I think it's a little bit contagious.
Puerto Rico is very well positioned, not only because of its Latin American background, but also because of its US-based federal laws.
PCMG does take advantage of a number of the different economic incentive programs offered by the Department of Economic Development.
Puerto Rico is a unique destination with many advantages. The incentives that help companies and talent to land here in Puerto Rico are creating all the environment to come to Puerto Rico with benefits that are important for these companies to start and to land and to establish their operations.
I believe Puerto Rico is an ideal place to grow a business. It has the right infrastructure, it has the right talent, it has the right incentives, and it's a great place to be.
Because it's the private sector here that's really going to be empowered to make Puerto Rico into a real player in the world stage, whether it's finance, technology, science. And the opportunity here is unparalleled because you get to participate in the complete reformation of the island at every level, at every sector. And there's no better place to do that than in the Caribbean.
So yeah, I'm gonna stop it there. It's a little bit of an intense video, but you can kind of see the language that they're using, right? They're talking about rebuilding Puerto Rico, about using investment as kind of like this humanitarian effort to uplift the entire region. What's happening now is you have several investors cashing in on the low property values and the destroyed industries after these natural and economic disasters happened, and the government kind of just like, you know, stumbling into reacting as much as they can to keep things somewhat manageable. Today, you know, it's still up for debate how effective they are at reacting and how effective they are at keeping the situation, quote unquote, under control and healthy for investors, in part because people are so pissed off. and you know, you can see this in last year. For the first time in Puerto Rican history, the people of Puerto Rico were able to remove a governor, not just any governor, right? The son of the governor that was once called the Messiah. You might remember the period of the 1990s, right? 1995, when all these privatizations started happening. That was Pedro Rosselló. Pedro Rosselló is the father of Ricky Rosselló, which became governor in the last election cycle, and which, similarly to his father, started privatizing a lot of other public corporations like education, like the Autoridad de Energía Eléctrica, the electrical company, all in response to Hurricane Maria. So Rosselló announced these privatization efforts in 2018, about a year after, and framed them as this way of helping aid the recovery. So with this, we get to the present future, right? I want to ask you all, you know, do you think this response to the crisis will solve Puerto Rico's economic and humanitarian crisis? Has tax exemption worked in the past? And then what can we expect of Puerto Rico's future? I'll leave those questions up to you. And at this point, this is my part of the presentation. So thank you for listening to me talk.
We do have one question about, is there any action towards those locations in New York of the hedge funds? Are we going to plan any actions around that?
Rafa?
So there have been actions, ongoing actions, since PROMESA was declared and signed. There has been actions in New York. There's also been actions most recently of this past year. There are various groups that have done different things. Particularly, don't go away if you're planning on leaving, because we have a little bit more just to tie PROMESA into COVID. So, you know, there have been multiple actions. We have wanted to do more. Obviously, right now at this moment with coronavirus, we're going to have to wait and see how things play out before we can see what the next steps are going to be regarding that. But, you know, the answer is yes, there have been, there will be, there will continue to be until this is ended. Any other questions? Okay, if not, Giovanni and I are going to tag team this next section, which is going to be a lot shorter, but we just wanted to take some time because, you know, COVID is something that is affecting everybody right now around the world. But one of the things that we talked about was also how Puerto Rico is not in a good position to handle something like COVID. And what we're seeing right now, the response from the governor in terms of, and I'm going to put it this way, in putting repressive measures in terms of curfews, and in terms of the way that, you know, you have police coming out and arresting people. You had over 100 residents that were arrested the past 2 weeks. But meanwhile, tourists are walking around on the streets and at the beach and taking pictures and doing whatever they want to do. So we really have to ask ourselves, you know, are these measures around public health, or are these measures around, you know, repressing people and really protections for who, right? So if we look at these slides, over 16% of Puerto Rico's population are elderly, and that means over 65 years old. 40% of them live at or below the poverty level. And a high percentage compared to the elderly on the mainland are suffering from poor health conditions, right? So what this tells us is when you look at COVID and who is most affected by severe cases, it's people over the age of 65. So if 16% or over 16% of that population are in Puerto Rico, in the archipelago, and 40% of them are living below poverty level, they're not in a good situation to be able to handle or navigate this crisis. You can go to the next slide, please. An investigation found that substantial health professional shortages throughout Puerto Rico, and that this is mainly due to a massive exodus of doctors to the mainland United States. So doctors in Puerto Rico do not make even a little bit of what doctors in the United States mainland are making. And so what happens is that people who are doctors in Puerto Rico say, well, you know what, I can make more going to the United States. And so I'm going to go to the United States and I'm going to, you know, make the money there because I can't survive here. So it was later found, sorry, my internet was a little unstable. It was later exacerbated by the financial crisis that triggered budget cuts and austerity measures, further straining the island's healthcare system. So this also is something to think about that ties it straight to what Miguel was talking about regarding these austerity measures. You already have a health system that is falling apart. You already have people who are in need of good health services not being able to access them. And now you're going to talk about a pandemic like COVID hitting you know, Puerto Rico. You know, when we look at the healthcare system, you're looking at over 200 patients for every one doctor. And so that's also something to keep in mind as well. You can go to the next slide, please. So according to Miguel Soto-Class, who's the president of the Center for New Economy, Puerto Rico is going to be clobbered by this pandemic. And I'm very worried that the government is saying it will be easy to come back from this when that's not the case. It will be particularly devastating for small businesses and locally led NGOs. And it's another nail in the coffin for small and local businesses in Puerto Rico. So right now, what's happening is that this curfew and these imposed measures that Governor Wanda has put into place is closing really local businesses. It's not closing the Walmarts. It's not closing the big U.S. corporations. It's closing the small and local businesses that really can't afford to be closed at this time. And even if we said, you know, it needs to get closed because we need to contain these measures, the government is not going to do its due diligence in protecting the local businesses and the local economy. Instead, it's going to protect the U.S. interests, right? So this is also something that we need to keep in mind as well. You can go to the next slide, please. And so right now, there have been 14 confirmed cases of COVID as of this morning through the Miami Herald have been confirmed in Puerto Rico. If you look at New York City as a model, right, we started with one case, and before you knew it, next week, it was about hundreds of cases throughout New York City. So we have 14 confirmed cases, right? And that's right now within Puerto Rico. I see that there's a question of, is there a predicted timeline for when the curfew will be lifted? There's not a timeline. So Giovanni just said that it just went up to 21 cases. So this is something that is spreading really rapidly. Among an elderly population, it's going to spread even more rapidly. What the United States did, or not what the United States did, but what airlines did was lower prices specifically to Puerto Rico and to the Caribbean. So you have a bunch of people who are coming out to Puerto Rico right now and taking advantage of these cheap flights, and they're not staying inside. They're not respecting the curfew. They're out in the streets doing whatever they want. So it's not safeguarding Puerto Rico if you're not telling tourists to get out of Puerto Rico. Additionally, because of our colonial status, we can't close our own borders, okay? We have to wait for the United States to say, okay, we're going to close the borders of Puerto Rico. We have to wait until the United States, okay, this is a bad enough health crisis. And so right now, we have still more tourists coming in that most likely are carrying infected virus, because at this point, what they have learned is that even if you are asymptomatic, you can still be a carrier of the virus and you can still transmit it to other people. So this is something that is a major crisis that we need to be paying attention to and we need to be focused on. And one of the things that groups on the ground in Puerto Rico have been asking is similar to things that people here in the US have been asking, which is a rent freeze on the rent so that people are able to not get evicted from their homes. No to the tourists that are roaming around the streets and causing infections on people. Greater support for the local businesses and local economy. A greater health infrastructure and more stuff going into that. So that is another thing that we need to keep in mind. I also want to just read this one thing somebody just sent me before we started, and this is brand new. This is from the Fiscal Control Board itself. And what it's saying is that no one knows at this time how long it will take to overcome COVID-19. Therefore, in that spirit, the Oversight Board will present a motion in court to adjourn consideration of the proposed plan of adjustment disclosure hearing until further notice. Less than a month ago, the Oversight Board presented a proposed plan of adjustment to significantly reduce the Commonwealth's liabilities. However, in light of Puerto Rico's current reality, the Oversight Board believes that the government and the Oversight Board's sole focus should be on getting Puerto Rico through the unfortunate crisis. Over the next few days, the Oversight Board will engage in collaborative discussions with the government's leadership to find reasonable and meaningful financial and policy solutions that ensure the safety of the people. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that the Fiscal Control Board is on our side? No, right? What we've seen in the past when we look at Hurricane Maria, when we look at the earthquakes that have taken place, this is just a way for them to get the focus off of what they're doing behind closed doors and to figure out new plans for how they're going to still divest money into themselves. And that goes back to Miguel's point of disaster capitalism. So this next slide, I'm going to hand over to Gio, and he's going to explain a little bit more regarding those things.
All right. So thank you, Miguel and Rafa. Tie this all back to the debt a little bit more, and thanks for mentioning that news that you just shared. Sometimes these measures that the Fiscal Control Board is implementing are like mostly, well, it's proven by fact they're always in benefit of the hedge funds, not the people of Puerto Rico. And so we have here two things right now. There are, of course, people that are taking action about the debt and the current crisis. And on the left side, you have here a letter being sent to Congress by the Center for Popular Democracy that has already like 75 different nonprofit organizations, community groups, collectives that have signed on to this letter. And this letter basically says, hey, like there's $9 billion out here that are available to be used. And why don't we use this to help the people right now? And so on the right side, I'm going to translate the one on the right side that explains these things a little bit more. And this on the right side is from, I believe it's Auditoría Ya, which is one of the groups that's been on the fight to audit the debt. They've had many successes, and they're like them and Construyamos el Recuerdo are both good pages to hop on Instagram and Facebook, so you can keep up to date with what's happening internally with the struggle, right, with this debt and coronavirus. So on the right side it says here, instead of paying the bondholders, let's pay 15 days salary for everyone. That's the quantity right there under the little dollar sign here. It says let's ensure employment. Let's pay some pensions, and let's give 1 month, dosis para todo Puerto Rico, and one month of antiviral medicine that was created by the Cubans. And that's also paid for the electrical energy of Puerto Rico, right? And so all that in yellow, all that little stuff in yellow, if you see the graph on the far right, is that bit of that $9 billion. So there's more than enough money to help every single person in Puerto Rico. And I'm not an economist or a great mathematician, but I'm sure if all Puerto Ricans went back to Puerto Rico, we'll be fine with those $9 billion for the next month, which is wild. There's a lot of money there that's saved specifically to pay the debt. It's money that's just put in a safe just in case there's something happening and we can keep paying the debt. So like there, as the graph says, there is enough money to pay the pay pieces of the debt right now, and then to also just help the Puerto Rican people completely. And if you want to go over and use that money even more efficiently, rather than pay a debt that nobody knows who owes what, right? We look at the bottom here where it says we can buy COVID-19 tests for everybody. We can buy one laptop with Wi-Fi for every student in public schools in Puerto Rico. And we could construct a hospital like the one they created in Wuhan, China, to deal with the pandemic with the rest of that money. So there's more than enough money right now to support Puerto Rico. And so the fight right now is to tell Congress, hopefully, right, and tell them, and hopefully they'll listen. But at times, neoliberalism is not working. Tell them, right, yo, like there's money. Let's help the people of Puerto Rico. And let's move over. Let's continue talking about this afterwards. It's not a time to be paying a debt when people just suffered an earthquake a couple months ago, and are still suffering through that. And now the COVID crisis, which is, as Miguel was mentioning, with the data about how many senior citizens in Puerto Rico, how the lack of doctors, lack of hospitals. So like I would say, definitely check out their pages. If any of y'all in this presentation, anyone in this meeting are part of an organization and want to check out that letter, we'll send a link to the letter in the follow-up email, so y'all can read it, and y'all can message them and be like, hey, yes, we want to be part of this letter too. Please do so. And I would also, on that email, we're going to make sure that we also share pages that you can follow, so that you can follow up what's happening with the debt, and organizations and groups that are fighting to audit the debt and to cancel the debt entirely. And that's it for me. So thank you.
Yeah, so we just wanted to highlight all of those things that are happening. And the truth is that things are about to get a lot worse. And I don't say that to be an alarmist, but I say it because it's going to be factually true with the effects of what COVID is going to do, and because of PROMESA already setting a stage ready to destroy. And so we really have to be alert and be forming conversations with folks on the ground around support and around what are the demands that are being called for, and echoing those demands, because it is going to hit, and it's already hit. Currently, right now, there are residents again in the streets. I just had somebody tell me the other day that even before the curfew, they were being asked for their IDs. They were being harassed by police. So we really need to be paying attention to this. There's a whole bunch of things that are taking place as a result. I just shared to the chat that there is also going to be a webinar tonight in Spanish from Organización Boricua by doctors in Puerto Rico, specific to this issue. It will be in Spanish, but the link is there. So definitely feel free to take a look at it. And Luisa also just shared that supermarkets and grocery stores today will be closing across Vieques with no known time frame of when they will reopen. So, and Vieques, we already know, of course, also is facing even more intense isolation and doesn't have a hospital. And so Vieques is something that we also have to really be paying attention to as well. So thank you, Luisa.
We had a couple questions, but my thing closed down, reopened. Rafa, could you scroll up and see if there's any of those questions that weren't answered, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
And before we go into the questions, I know we are at time. We said we would end at 2. For those of you that want to stay for the questions, at 4, or at 5 Eastern.
4 Eastern.
Yeah, 4 Central Time. I want to thank everybody that presented today. Thank you so much. Thanks to everybody that participated in the chat. And also, I didn't see the translators, but were the translators on as well?
We didn't need translation today from the survey, so no, we didn't have it.
Okay. But anyway, thanks for the people that were willing to be translators. I just wanted to say that before we go into the questions. The other thing is, if you are able to support the Boricua Resistance chapters, please do. Each chapter has a Venmo and an account. We really appreciate your support, and we hope to continue doing more of this in the coming weeks. That's it. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, Miguel. So one question from Luisa is, what do we want? Do we have clear goals of what independence would look like? I'll open this up to anybody who wants to respond. I have my own response, but I'll open it up. Is that a nah? Nobody wants to respond?
Yeah, just so you know, you can unmute yourself if you click at the 3 dots right next to your name.
So I think in terms of independence, and this chat keeps going on and on. I think that in terms of independence, right, there does need to be a clear idea of what that can look like. But I think that that's something that people in Puerto Rico also have already been doing. You know, when we look at the earthquakes, when we look at Hurricane Maria, when we look at anything, the government really hasn't been doing anything for people. It really has been the people themselves that have been building Puerto Rico and keeping it going and keeping it moving. And so, you know, I think that, you know, when we talk about independence, sometimes people think that feels so far-fetched, but it's not that far-fetched because people have already been building themselves up as independent and powerful. So I think that's also something to think about. Scrolling through to look at other pictures and other things.
Personally, the answer that I give to the question about independence is that the alternatives to independence have demonstrated that they don't work. And in all honesty, I say that, you know, statehood is a fantasy more than anything. So at this point, the question that we should ask ourselves is, who should lead the future of Puerto Rico? Should it be the people that live and work and call the archipelago home, or should they not be the ones to decide their own future? There's the question about do we have a right toward our livelihood? Do we have a right towards what our life is going to be? And my answer to that is yes. You know, all oppressed people across the world have a right for liberation. And in the context of Puerto Rico, liberation is only possible by the removal of colonial relationships. We cannot achieve liberation through statehood. Statehood would be the climax of oppression. It would be the final step in not recognizing Puerto Rico's agency. So
I wanted to comment on that. As of recent, I've seen a lot of pro-statehood people in their neoliberal ways, claiming that becoming a state is in fact decolonizing Puerto Rico, and so it's just very funny that that's being used to fight for statehood, which is, as is evident through Hawaii, Alaska, and other colonized countries for the U.S. It's more colonization. Like I just don't understand how that makes sense. But yes, if whenever you see a friend talking about, hey, but Puerto Ricans do want statehood, well, actually, it's a very complicated topic, and data from the 2016 plebiscite is not accurate data, as we know, because there was a boycott, right? And so right now, in the political democratic sphere, a lot of democratic folks are into the idea of Puerto Rico becoming a state. They're Americans, you gotta become a state, and whatnot. And people, Puerto Ricans that are pro-statehood do use the data from that 2016 plebiscite to say, hey, look at this, 99% of people said yes. And same thing happened in Hawaii a long time ago, where it was like, oh, look at all the Hawaiians that won statehood, but the actual Hawaiians were not allowed or able to be a part of that process, right? So it's very, very complex. I kind of went on a tangent there, but yeah, decolonizing is not becoming a state.
There's a comment that says, I would love to have more manageable ways to speak about these issues, especially about statehood versus independence. So yeah, we'll definitely get more into that.
Maybe that could be another presentation.
Yeah, maybe that's that. I feel like, yeah, like you said, that's definitely a topic that we can do like a training about, like how to one-on-one on how to talk about these issues.
And then there was a question earlier about the incarcerated people on the island. What's going on about that?
Whew, yeah. I haven't heard anything about them at this moment. What I do know is that when you were talking about Hurricane Maria, a lot of these prisons are built in flood zones. And so I think that what that tells us already is that obviously these are neglected sectors, similar to what we see in the U.S., neglected people in society, people that are left to kind of suffer the worst of it. And so that's definitely one of the things that have come up. I just also I saw a comment that I felt was also really important that I just wanted, it was a little bit further up, that Vero made, where she said that we had one of the most efficient health systems before Rosello's father was the governor before him, privatized it. It was built by public health community workers through the Centros de Diagnóstico y Tratamiento, CDT, and they were medical facilities that were all around the different pueblos or the different towns in Puerto Rico. And so it was a decentralized model of service in terms of medical work. And then there was another comment that she made.
Yeah, about the, oh, wait, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I just wanted, because I went up to like a little bit higher up. So Vero also said that the legislature of Puerto Rico also blocked a law to make sure that private employers paid their workers. They can ask them to go to work and not provide paid leave time to prevent the epidemic. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
On that note of the detained peoples, I'm going to include in the chat the live Facebook that's going on right now here in the Northwest in Tacoma, Washington. We have a detention center concentration camp here that we protest against, and there's a live Facebook live event going on that we're going to be talking with the people inside. So I'm just going to include that in the chat. And then the question about the gentrification in Puerto Rico and how the mass migrations have been happening, if we should have goals to move to the island respectfully with the communities already there. That's a big question that we could even have a whole other presentation on as well. So
yeah, that's a massive question. Gentrification is very complex too. It has a lot of layers, and we see gentrification being done by Puerto Ricans themselves, right? And in the need of having a good income, and that happens all around the U.S. So it's very complex. I don't know if you want to say something about that, Miguel.
There's a long history with that question. You know, that's been the question of the Puerto Rican diaspora since since the creation of the Puerto Rican barrios. I'll start this off with a side story. My father was part of the Puerto Rican diaspora when he was a little kid in the 1950s. So after, when he was like a tween or something, my grandparents sent him back to the island because he was getting involved in gangs and whatever. So like good parents, they're like, you're gonna go live with your grandma and work in la finca again. And he actually wrote an essay in college. It was called Neo-Ricans and the New Return Migration of Boricuas to the island. It was a college essay that I happened upon. He was talking about his own experience and about the whole process of like reacculturating into archipelago Puerto Rican culture. He mentioned that although they were born in Puerto Rico and then migrated to the United States and then returned, they were still treated as outsiders. So kind of as this like the diaspora outsider, which is still a thing, right? For Puerto Ricans that are either born or raised in the United States, when they return to the archipelago, they're often faced with distrust, because there's a whole dynamic, right, between the issue of people from the archipelago and people from the diaspora, and it also works the other way around, right? As a recent migrant from Puerto Rico myself, when I moved to Chicago, I was confronted with the already established Puerto Rican diaspora here, and they put into question my my diaspora-ness, right? There's this whole argument that although I've lived in the States for 13 years, I'm not a part of the diaspora. So this is like a big family discussion that we need to have at some point. My argument is Puerto Rico, even before the mass migrations, has and is a nation, an imagined nation, because although we are tied to this land, although we are tied to the archipelago, to La Isla, all of that, what makes us, what we know as quote unquote Puerto Ricans and Puerto Rican-ness, was heavily influenced by the diaspora. So the creation of our symbols, the creation of the flag, the creation of a lot of cultural items like salsa and reggaeton, right? All of these were influenced by diaspora experiences. So in my opinion, you can't separate the diaspora population from the archipelago population. Although they have a lot of key cultural differences, their futures are tied in together, right? So we have to be responsible as quote unquote diaspora individuals when going into Puerto Rico, because it's like being from New York and moving to Chicago and saying, yo, Chicago, I'm gonna solve all your problems. The Chicago people are gonna flip you off. They're gonna say, go, like, bye. Similarly, we can't if we're looking to move back to Puerto Rico, it has to be a conversation. It has to be on both sides. And again, liberation is not just building a state in a geographical place, right? Liberation can go beyond borders. So we also have to be creative, right, with how we talk about becoming free.
I also think I just want to say really quickly, okay, if you read the Young Lords tried. They were a group of the Young Lords that tried to move to Puerto Rico to bring what they were doing here over there, and it was not received well, and it really broke a lot of them emotionally and mentally to go back and to not be received well by people in Puerto Rico. And I think that one of the things that we also have to keep in mind is that the diaspora, and this is also why we study. We don't study just because we want to study and be like, yeah, that was cool information. We study so that we understand how to change and how to make change, right? Change can only come when you study and you understand cause and effect, and you understand what mistakes were made, and you understand what things were strong and what things weren't, and we understand the enemy. So only change can come through study, but we don't just study like we're in school because we need to pass a test, and that's really important. These school sessions are not, to give you just information to think about it in your head while you're in quarantine. They're there so that we can really be thinking about how are we organizing and how are we connecting with one another. And so I think one of the things we really have to understand is that the diaspora would not exist without the conditions that are happening in Puerto Rico as a result of the colony. And so we are very much, our whole existence is a result of what's happening in Puerto Rico. And so we also have to keep that in mind, both the new diaspora and the old diaspora, that this connection is not just something that just arose one day because of a family fight. It arose very, very intentionally because of colonialism and because of capitalism and because of competition and because of scarcity of resources and because people had to leave to go get things. So we really have to keep that in mind, that the enemy is not the people in Puerto Rico, and the enemy is not the diaspora. The enemy is capitalism and the U.S. colonialism and imperialism. That's the enemy. And so we need to be asking ourselves, how are we actually creating unities? And that requires a lot of humility. That requires a lot of discussion and a lot of taking time to have hard conversations. But it's not going to happen in one day. And I think to also answer that question, there are people in Puerto Rico who have gone back and who are organizing with the people on the ground and who are doing great work. And I think that, when I've gone and I've talked to different organizations, people have said, we actually do need people to return. And that's the voice of people on the ground who have been organizing. We do need people to come back, right? Those are people who have said that. But, I think the most important thing is your point around what are the conversations that we're having around returning? What does that look like? Are we going back to start a business and make money for ourselves, right? Which is not the way that we should be thinking about it. Or are we going back to contribute to what's already being done on the ground? And that's really what we have to think about. So that's the last point I'll say on that.
Mic drop. That was...
Pero if nothing else, I think we just want to say thank you so much to everybody who participated. We are planning on doing another one next week at the same time and same great place. We will send out that information to come, and we're planning on doing these as we look at how quarantine is going to develop. We don't really know what's going to happen again with COVID, how long people are going to be inside the homes. But we wanted to take space to gather together and to learn. And yeah, so thank you all.
Thanks,
anybody needs to call in a question? I know not everybody can use the chat feature, so if anybody needs to use the phone call feature. Then also maybe we can all unmute and we can end with a chant. I don't know what you guys would want to say, but it'd be a nice way to tie everything together.
It says, I'm going to write it. It says, desde adentro y desde afuera, le vamos a dar candela.
Oh, if you guys want to unmute, it's just in the corner. It has this red slash through the microphone. If you press on that, unmute if you feel like it, and then we can all do our chant together. Come on, hey! All right, let's do this.
Miguel, you gonna lead this one?
Sure. All right. I'm gonna say it first, and then we can all say it together. We good? We good? Ready?
Hey!
Desde adentro y desde afuera, le
vamos a dar candela. I messed it up.
Everyone's just really weak, right? Oh, shit, we're on.
Yes.
Otra vez.
It's not. We tried.
Sorry, man. Sorry.
Miguel is, I can't hear Miguel.
Desde adentro y desde afuera.
Candela.
All the lagging.
All right. There was a request for another one. Que viva Puerto Rico libre, fuera Yankee de Caribe.
Que
viva Puerto Rico libre.
Libre, fuera Yankee del Caribe.
Viva Puerto Rico.
Be safe. We hope to see you next week. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
How do I exit out of here? Oh.